Have you ever felt that jolt of disbelief when a total stranger storms up to you, points at your face and screams, "Call the police, I've caught a trespasser"? Now picture this. You're stretched out poolside, shades on, finally unwinding, after weeks of brutal 16-hour days, on your own property, when suddenly you're being threatened with law enforcement. That was my afternoon. And what started as a relaxing moment turned into the opening act of the wildest HOA nightmare I've ever lived through. My name's Cassian Dusk. I'm a tech entrepreneur, or I was, until 6 months ago when everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years grinding out a startup with 2 college buddies coding in my garage, surviving off ramen and grit. We didn't have much, but we had vision. And somehow, that vision paid off. The company got acquired. Big time. Not island and private jet money, but enough to put me in the rare category of being free. Free of debt. Free of late rent. Free of constantly worrying about the next check. After the dust settled, I found myself in my early 30s with time, capital, and no roadmap. I wasn't the type to blow it on sports cars or bottle service. I wanted something meaningful, tangible. I kept circling back to one idea: real estate. But not just any real estate. I wanted to be the landlord I never had. See, I grew up in the Midwest, renting from people who treated tenants like they were disposable. Leaky ceilings, ignored repairs, surprise inspections, I'd seen it all, so I thought, what if I could flip that? Buy a place, manage it right, and give people a decent, respectful place to live. That's when I found Sunnydale Heights. It was a modest apartment complex. 50 units, central courtyard, and the real gem, a pool. The bones were good, but the place had clearly been mismanaged. The listing price was lower than I expected, and after touring it, I understood why. Years of neglect, complaints stacked up online like wreckage, mold, broken ACs. Rent increases without repairs. Still, I saw potential. I ran the numbers, made an offer, and, surprisingly, the owners accepted fast. Too fast in hindsight. But at the time, I just assumed they were desperate. The deal closed quietly, and I kept it that way, no big announcement. I wanted to understand the place first. Who lived there, what needed fixing, and what the actual vibe was. So I kept the property management company in place for the transition, while I began reviewing contracts, arranging inspections, and planning upgrades. A few weeks in, I needed a break. The pool had just been serviced, my order, and it looked like the perfect place to unwind. I figured, why not enjoy it before launching into renovations? I threw on swim trunks, grabbed a towel, and headed down. I didn't wear anything flashy, no Rolex, no fancy shoes. I looked like any other resident, which apparently was enough to paint a target on my back. I was just settling into a lounger, headphones in, eyes closed, sun warming my skin, when the moment happened. "Excuse me," came a shrill voice slicing through the air like a blade. "This pool is for Meadowbrook residents only." I opened my eyes and saw her. Mid-50s, rigid posture, arms crossed like she'd been born in a boardroom. Platinum-streaked, bob that didn't move in the breeze. Designer sunglasses, Louis Vuitton tote, and a key ring, a massive ring of keys, clipped to her belt like she was security for Fort Knox. Her name, I would later learn, was Dahlia Noir, president of the neighboring HOA, Meadowbrook Estates. She looked at me like I'd just tracked mud through her Versailles living room. I sat up slowly. "I think you've got the wrong idea," I said, gesturing toward the Sunnydale buildings just behind the pool gate. "This pool is part of Sunnydale Heights. I live here," she scoffed. Not a polite chuckle or passive-aggressive smirk. An actual theatrical scoff complete with head tilt and dramatic exhale. "Young man, I've been president of the Meadowbrook HOA for 10 years. I know exactly what amenities belong to us." The way she said 10 years was like she expected me to salute. "I don't know who you're visiting over at Sunnydale, but unless you can give me a unit number, I'll be calling security. Or the police." That's when I noticed them. The details. The pool gate connecting to Sunnydale had a new chain and padlock. The signage that read, "Meadowbrook Residents Only," was newer than the fence it was attached to. Even the pool furniture, branded with tiny Meadowbrook logos. It was subtle but deliberate, like someone had been slowly, piece by piece, claiming territory. I didn't respond right away, so she interpreted my silence as fear. She actually smiled, a cold, triumphant thing. She was used to people backing down. I kept my tone calm. "Ma'am, with respect, the legal documents say otherwise. The pool is part of Sunnydale." Her eyes narrowed. "Absolutely not. This pool is maintained by Meadowbrook dues and has been for years. Sunnydale residents have never had access. You're trespassing." And then, the moment she made it clear this wasn't about confusion or boundaries, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said. "You can explain it to them." But here's what sent chills down my spine. She didn't dial 911. She tapped on a contact labeled Maddox, cell. Not emergency, not sheriff, a personal officer contact, one she'd clearly used before. I didn't flinch. "Go ahead. I'll wait here and explain it to them myself." Her brow twitched. She wasn't expecting that. She raised the phone to her ear anyway. Behind her, a young family approached the gate, clearly Sunnydale residents. But when they saw Dahlia, the father immediately turned around and ushered his disappointed kids away. No confrontation, no protest. Just defeat. She didn't even acknowledge them, but I saw it. That flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. That's when I realized this wasn't about pool access. It was about control. She didn't just think she ran the HOA. She believed she ran the neighborhood. As she began her call, her voice took on a new tone. Not the sharp command she used with me, but fragile, vulnerable. "Maddox, it's Dahlia again. Yes, another trespasser. He's being difficult. He's large, intimidating. I feel unsafe." I nearly laughed. I'm average height, not even remotely threatening. I'd said nothing aggressive. But she knew how to frame it, and worse, she'd done this before. The officer's voice on the other end was muffled, but I could hear the exhaustion in his tone. That's when it clicked. This wasn't her first call. This was her playbook. But this time she was about to learn something that would blow her entire act to pieces. Something she didn't see coming. I wasn't a trespasser. I was the new owner of the entire building. And the pool she thought she ruled, it legally belonged to me. Ownership for the time being was mine. But the real story started when I asked about the pool. Specifically, I asked Helen, a longtime Sunnydale resident, about its history. Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, that pool's been a point of contention for years," she said. "It was always part of Sunnydale, built with the original complex back in the 1980s. But about 5 or 6 years ago, when Meadowbrook was developed next door as some upscale, gated utopia, things started to change." She explained that the previous owners of Sunnydale had started neglecting the property. The pool, once the jewel of the community, fell into disrepair. Tiles cracking, filtration system failing, weeds sprouting through the concrete. That's when Dahlia and her HOA stepped in, Helen said, her voice tightening. They offered to help maintain the pool in exchange for their residents getting access. At first, it seemed like a blessing, but over time, they just took over. Signs appeared. Meadowbrook only access. Eventually, Sunnydale residents were outright banned. Helen's story was illuminating and infuriating. The previous owners had essentially allowed a neighboring HOA to steal an amenity that legally belonged to Sunnydale residents. No formal agreement, no paperwork, just a slow, steady takeover, and no one ever challenged it. Most of us older folks knew the truth, Helen added, her voice cracking slightly. But what could we do? Management wouldn't listen, and Dahlia's HOA just got more aggressive. Eventually, we just gave up. She patted my hand. "I'm glad someone finally cares enough to look into this. That pool meant a lot to us." I left Helen's apartment angry and determined. That same afternoon, I called Daisy Aurora, a sharp-witted attorney I'd worked with during a past acquisition. She listened carefully as I explained the situation. "This is actually pretty straightforward," Daisy said. "If the pool is on your property according to the deed, it's yours, period. It doesn't matter who's been maintaining it." She promised to look into potential complications and advised me to document everything. "If Meadowbrook has been charging their residents for maintenance of a pool they don't legally own," she added, "that could constitute fraud. And if they've been denying access to your residence while leasing units that advertise pool use, that's another legal mess." The next morning, someone slipped a stack of papers under my temporary apartment door. Violation notices from Meadowbrook HOA. They accused me of unauthorized use of community amenities, inappropriate behavior in common areas, and failure to comply with community standards. Each violation came with a fine, over $500 in total. It was a laughable intimidation tactic. I wasn't even part of their HOA, but the message was clear. Dahlia was escalating. Later that week, I met Daniel, Foster Meadowbrook HOA's secretary, at a quiet coffee shop. He approached me nervously after spotting me reviewing renovation plans. "I'm Daniel," he whispered. "I've been taking meeting minutes for the HOA for years. I think you should know what's happening." He explained that Dahlia had called an emergency meeting to discuss the threat to community standards posed by Sunnydale's new ownership. Worse, she'd created an unofficial group of residents tasked with monitoring my activities, documenting every movement, every imagined violation. "She's been HOA president for 10 years, Daniel said. "She maintains control by giving her allies reduced fees, ignoring their violations, and fast-tracking their maintenance requests. But if you challenge her, you get buried in fines, and people turn their backs on you." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Because I took this job to help the community. Instead, I've spent years documenting abuse. No one's ever stood up to her. But you," he hesitated, "you might actually have the leverage to do something." Before we parted ways, Daniel mentioned one final detail. According to financial records, Meadowbrook residents had been paying a specific monthly fee for pool maintenance for the past 5 years. Money for a pool they didn't own. That night, Daisy and I pored over county records, and there it was, in black and white. The pool was on Sunnydale property. No easements, no shared access, no contracts, nothing. "They've been squatting on your property," Daisy said, "and charging their residents for it. We reviewed our options: legal action, cease and desist letters, injunctions. But I opted for a different approach: reclamation. Openly, peacefully, publicly. I would take back what was mine, but I'd offer Meadowbrook residents a shared use agreement. Fair, transparent, legal. This wasn't about punishing families who'd been misled. It was about restoring what Sunnydale had lost. So I organized a Saturday afternoon barbecue by the pool. Flyers went up across Sunnydale: community pool reopening, all Sunnydale residents, welcome. New signage was installed: Sunnydale Heights, community pool private property, for use by residents and approved guests. Only I even hired a professional security guard, not to keep people out, but to keep things civil. By 2 p.m., the pool area was alive again. Kids splashing, neighbors laughing, burgers sizzling. The air was electric with joy. And then, she arrived, Dahlia Noir, flanked by 2 men who looked like her personal security. Her expression was one of tightly controlled rage. She marched toward me. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "This pool belongs to Meadowbrook. You have no right to host events or change the signage." I smiled warmly. "Miss Noir," I said, extending a hand, "welcome to the Sunnydale Community Pool. Would you like a burger? We've got plenty." She ignored my hand. "You're trespassing," she hissed. "This isn't going to end well for you." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice even, "as Officer Stone and I confirmed earlier, this pool is part of Sunnydale Heights. I'm Cassie Dusk, the new owner. I'm simply restoring this amenity to the rightful community." I gestured around us. And while I'm willing to discuss a shared use agreement, the days of unilateral control are over. Her lips tightened. You'll be hearing from our attorney. She stormed off. 30 minutes later, 2 men in private security uniforms showed up claiming they were there to remove unauthorized guests from Meadowbrook property. I met them at the gate with the deed in hand. Gentlemen, I said calmly, you're currently trespassing on Sunnydale property. I'm the owner, and these are my invited guests. The guards looked at the documents, then at each other, then at Dahlia, whose face turned a deep shade of crimson. After a quick radio call to their supervisor, they nodded politely and walked away. Dahlia was left standing alone. Residents from both communities had gathered, watching everything unfold. Some from Meadowbrook began questioning her, demanding answers. This isn't over, Dusk, she snapped before storming off again. But the damage was done. Daniel approached me quietly. That was impressive, he said. But she's not going to let this go. I have something you'll want to see. We met the next evening at a quiet restaurant. I've been keeping records, he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Financials, emails, meeting notes, years of abuse. Dahlia had been using HOA funds for personal gain, spa treatments, labeled as community wellness, expensive dinners filed as board meetings. He looked up, eyes tired. I wanted to help the community. But what she's doing, it's criminal. And I can't be part of it anymore. I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming next. The war over the pool was just the beginning. Meadowbrook property values had begun to climb, somewhere between 15% and 20%, thanks to the perceived exclusivity tied to their private pool. That artificial exclusivity was a major selling point, and Dahlia knew it. When I quietly tested the waters by inquiring through a third party about Meadowbrook's openness to a shared use agreement, Dahlia didn't just reject the idea, she responded enthusiastically, but with a proposal of her own. A $100,000 finder's fee directly to her, not the HOA, if she could quietly eliminate any obstacles to future development in the area. The implication was clear: grease her palm, and Meadowbrook's faux ownership of the pool would become official by other means. But what disturbed me more than her audacity was what came next. The current residents of Sunnydale won't be an issue, her email read. They've already been conditioned to avoid the pool area. Their leases have been carefully structured to omit any specific promises of pool access. That sent a chill down my spine. I pulled out the old lease agreements we'd collected during Sunnydale's acquisition. Sure enough, earlier leases had explicitly listed pool access as an amenity. But more recent ones? Access to available community amenities. A vague, deliberately manipulated phrase that gave them legal cover while quietly cutting off Sunnydale residents from a feature they'd always assumed was theirs. This wasn't a spontaneous land grab. It was a long-term strategy, meticulously calculated and executed in silence. I compiled the most damning findings into a formal report. Misrepresentation to Meadowbrook residents regarding ownership of the pool. Systematic collection of maintenance. Fees for a facility Meadowbrook didn't own. A secret development deal with Dahlia personally profiting via a 6-figure kickback. Dahlia must have known something was coming, because the next morning Daniel, who had been discreetly helping me, was terminated from his role as HOA secretary. The letter accused him of breach of confidentiality and actions contrary to the community's interests. It even hinted at possible legal action against him personally. He called me, voice weary but unsurprised. She found out, he said quietly. Somehow. She always knows. We'll protect you, I promised. Your documentation is crucial, and we're not backing down. I didn't expect my next ally to come from within Dahlia's own house. Erica Noir, her daughter, reached out through my business email. She requested a confidential meeting downtown, far from either community. When I arrived, she was already seated at the cafe, stylish, composed, her mother's presence but none of her arrogance. I want to be very clear about something, she began. I didn't know about the pool, or that she was fighting you over land that isn't even ours. Erica had helped Dahlia in the past, conducting HOA surveys, offering real consulting services. But things changed. She started asking me to invoice for work that wasn't being done. At first, it was just fudging timelines. Then, entire reports that never existed. When I pushed back, she said, "That's how HOAs work. Everyone does it." She looked away, her voice thick with guilt. I didn't push back hard enough. Then came the bombshell. Dahlia had been negotiating with a developer, planning to bulldoze the pool and replace it with luxury townhomes. If it happened, Dahlia stood to gain a personal finder's fee of over $100,000. Her obsession wasn't about protecting Meadowbrook. It was about cashing out, no matter who got hurt. Armed with Erica's testimony, Daniel's documents, and the lease discrepancies, I quietly began collecting signatures for a formal audit of the Meadowbrook HOA. According to their bylaws, if 30% of homeowners signed the petition, an audit could be triggered. And the more residents heard about what was happening, the faster that number climbed. Sensing her control slipping, Dahlia fought back. Hard. She held a press conference, inviting local neighborhood blogs and a community radio station. With the cameras rolling, she accused me of being a predatory developer, destroying the fabric of Meadowbrook. The irony was overwhelming, considering she was the one actively plotting development deals. That night, I received an anonymous text. "I have documentation of All Noir's HOA fund transactions. Meet me, Riverside Cafe, 9 p.m. It was a former HOA accountant, fired 3 years ago after questioning irregular expenses. She handed over a thumb drive with years of financial data. It confirmed everything. Diverted pool maintenance funds, false invoices, shell consulting firms, some linked directly to Erica. The narrative was undeniable now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fraud. We prepared a formal countersuit: fraudulent misrepresentation, unjust enrichment, interference with property rights. Dahlia's response? Sabotage. Someone broke into the Sunnydale pool shed overnight. The filtration system was vandalized, flooding the equipment room and frying half the electronics. Surveillance footage showed 3 masked individuals, unidentifiable, but their builds, their body language? Daniel recognized them instantly. They're her board loyalists. I'd bet my mortgage on it. We couldn't prove it, but the circumstantial timing was damning. Daisy filed for a temporary restraining order barring Dahlia and her associates from Sunnydale property. It was granted, but Dahlia wasn't done. She hosted community concern meetings in her home, spreading rumors that I was converting Sunnydale into low-income housing, that I was planning a nightclub where the pool used to be. Wild accusations. But she had loyal ears. Fortunately, Daniel had started secretly recording these meetings. As he circulated clips through neighborhood group chats, residents began seeing the truth. Dahlia wasn't protecting their community. She was protecting herself. Then came her biggest overreach. She dug into my past, calling former business partners from my tech days, accusing me of financial misconduct, hinting at legal problems, trying to scare my investors. That crossed a line. Several of them forwarded voicemails, recordings of Dahlia herself making provably false claims in her unmistakable voice. Daisy pounced. We added defamation to the countersuit and expanded the restraining order. Dahlia was now barred from contacting any of my associates, personally or professionally. She's unraveling, Daisy said. This pattern? This is someone watching her power slip away and losing control. But Dahlia had one final stunt to pull. She called an emergency HOA meeting, with one agenda item, to vote to ban me from Meadowbrook. I wasn't even a resident. The idea was laughable, but I went anyway. The community center was packed. Tension was thick. Dahlia stood at the podium, flanked by her board loyalists, accusing me of everything from trespassing to destabilizing community values. When she called for a vote, I stood. Before you vote, I said calmly, there are a few facts you should all know. I introduced myself properly, as the legal owner of Sunnydale Heights and the pool. Your HOA, I said, has no legal jurisdiction over me or my property. including the pool, which county records confirm is Sunnydale's, not Meadowbrook's. I projected the deeds, maps, and documents on a screen behind me. But more importantly, I continued, you've been misled. You've been paying fees for maintenance on a pool your HOA does not own. And those fees? They've been funneled elsewhere. Gasps, murmurs, some faces drained of color. I'm not here to exclude you, I added. I've drafted a fair use proposal, transparent, balanced, and open, to allow shared enjoyment of the pool, together. But that decision must come from truth, not deception. Dahlia lunged for the mic, her voice cracked with rage. This is absurd. The room didn't wait. Residents stood up demanding answers. Some shouted questions, others called for Dahlia's resignation on the spot. The meeting spiraled into chaos, not because of me, but because the truth had finally broken through. You can't arrest me. I'm the one who's called you here dozens of times, Dahlia snapped, glaring in disbelief. Officer Stone calmly pulled out a small notebook. Exactly, Mrs. Noir. I have detailed records of 27 calls you've made over the past 3 years, each for non-legitimate reasons. That's a pattern of misusing public resources, and today, it will serve as supporting evidence in the main case against you. The second officer stepped forward. Formal charges have been filed against you for financial fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds based on evidence submitted by former board members and forensic accountants. As Dahlia was escorted out in handcuffs, the room fell into stunned silence. The residents of Meadowbrook stood frozen, processing the dramatic downfall of a woman who had once seemed untouchable. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Dahlia's mismanagement came to light. An independent audit uncovered over $200,000 in misappropriated HOA funds, funneled into personal expenses, shell companies, and unauthorized diversions from earmarked purposes like pool maintenance. The HOA board was quickly restructured. I was asked to temporarily serve as acting president until formal elections could be held. One of our first actions was to resolve the legal dispute with Sunnydale. Once the new board reviewed the evidence, they quickly acknowledged our rightful ownership of the pool. A settlement was reached, including restitution for Meadowbrook residents who had paid pool dues under false pretenses. At her preliminary hearing, Dahlia remained defiant. I built this community, she declared before the judge. Without me, this neighborhood would have fallen apart years ago. The judge looked over the documents before responding coolly. And from what we've seen here, it appears you were quietly undermining it the entire time. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud and financial misconduct. A trial date was set for the following month. Erica, who had fully cooperated with the investigation, avoided charges but committed to repaying the consulting fees her company had received. The court proceedings dragged on for months, each hearing, peeling back another layer of Dahlia's corruption. Forensic accountants discovered offshore accounts where she had been quietly transferring small amounts, each just under the radar. But totaling over $75,000, legal discovery unearthed personal emails in which Dahlia mocked the very residents she claimed to protect. These people are sheep, she wrote to a friend. They'll pay whatever fees I tell them are necessary and thank me for the privilege. But perhaps most damning was the revelation that Dahlia had intentionally sabotaged Sunnydale for years, anonymously reporting fictitious code violations to city inspectors every time previous owners tried to improve the property. The fallout rippled through the community. Many Meadowbrook residents felt deeply betrayed. They had trusted Dahlia with their money, their homes, and their community's future. Support groups began to form, where residents shared stories of intimidation, selective enforcement, and the quiet, social exile they faced for questioning Dahlia's decisions. What emerged was a disturbing portrait of a petty dictatorship, built on fear, favoritism, and a carefully guarded inner circle. For me, witnessing it all reaffirmed my commitment to a different vision for Sunnydale. We accelerated renovations, prioritizing the repairs that most impacted residents' daily lives. Leaking roofs were patched, aging water heaters were replaced, security systems were modernized. The laundry room got energy-efficient machines and a fresh redesign. Each completed project was marked by a small community gathering, barbecues, potlucks, coffee socials. Slowly, a sense of connection began to bloom where division had once reigned. We worked with Meadowbrook's new HOA leadership to establish a fair, transparent shared use agreement for the pool. Sunnydale would maintain ownership and cover most of the costs, while Meadowbrook residents could purchase seasonal passes at a fair rate, with every dollar tracked and applied directly to maintenance. Meanwhile, Sunnydale underwent a transformation. We upgraded electrical systems, installed motion-activated lights, refreshed the landscaping, and painted the buildings in warm, welcoming tones. But more than aesthetics, we redefined governance. We created a resident advisory board that met monthly. Financial records were posted openly in common areas. Residents received quarterly reports outlining expenses and improvement plans. Even rent increases, when necessary, came with detailed explanations, plenty of notice, and were implemented gradually. The goal was to foster respect, not just between landlord and tenant, but among neighbors as co-stakeholders. One of the most beloved projects was the community garden. We reclaimed a neglected, overgrown patch of land and turned it into a thriving space where residents could grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers. The garden quickly became a gathering place. A retired horticulturist from Meadowbrook began hosting free workshops. A Sunnydale resident who ran a catering business started a monthly garden-to-table dinner series. What had been a boundary was now a bridge. 6 months after that first confrontation with Dahlia, we held a grand reopening celebration for the pool. At its center was a large mosaic created by a local artist, featuring designs submitted by residents from both communities. The piece depicted 2 distinct neighborhoods merging into one through shared water and open gates. It was a powerful, if unsubtle, metaphor, but it resonated deeply with everyone who had lived through the ordeal. Children splashed in the crystal-clear water. Adults mingled over refreshments. The invisible wall that had divided us for so long had finally crumbled. An elderly couple from Meadowbrook approached me during the celebration. "We've lived here for 15 years, the husband said. "This is the first time we've felt like we're part of a real community." His wife nodded. "We were thinking of selling and moving closer to our grandkids, but now, well, we might just stay a little longer." Moments like that made every battle worth it. Erica stood beside me watching the festivities. She had thrown herself into community service to make amends, using her business skills to help Meadowbrook implement transparent financial systems and better governance. "I keep wondering," she said quietly, "how different things might have been if someone had stood up to my mother years ago. So many people were driven away." I nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "you don't need to own everything to build something good. You just need to share it well." As for Dahlia, her trial ended in a guilty verdict on nearly all counts. The judge, citing her lack of remorse and the long-term manipulation of community funds, sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered financial restitution that may take decades to repay. Her conviction barely made waves. Both communities had already moved on, focused not on revenge, but on rebuilding. Ironically, her downfall did more to unite Meadowbrook and Sunnydale than any outreach campaign ever could. The real lesson of it all wasn't just about pool ownership or HOA politics. It was about how institutions break down when people stop paying attention, when they assume someone else is watching, or when fear keeps them silent. Dahlia didn't seize the pool in a single act of aggression. She took it piece by piece, through quiet manipulations that seemed minor on their own but collectively became theft. It took someone willing to challenge that status quo to set things right. Sunnydale Heights is now the kind of place I always wished I'd lived in. Maintenance requests are handled quickly. Common areas are clean. Neighbors greet each other by name. We've even created a tenant council to ensure everyone has a voice, and the waiting list for new residents grows longer every month. Turns out, treating people with respect and managing your property with integrity isn't just moral, it's good business, and we're just getting started.